Today, you're going to learn how to add authentication to your Next.js apps using Next-Auth inside the latest Next.js 13 app router. And we're going to create just a demo project to show you how to do this. So the first step in doing this is running npx, and I'm here within VS Code. I'm just in my terminal, and I'm going to run npx create next app at latest. And then it's going to ask me, what do I want my app name be? I'm going to say Next-Auth is what I'm going to name it. I'm not going to use TypeScript, not going to use ESLint. We're just going to focus on a demonstration of how you would add authentication for a certain provider. And we're going to use GitHub for that. We are going to use App Router, and we are going to initialize this project. So now that this project has been created, I'm going to go File, Open, and I'm going to open this folder. So now that I have my Next.js folder open here, you can see I have Next-Auth, I have my app folder, and just with the basic kind of template that Next.js gives you out of the box here. And I'm going to actually move this screen down just a little bit here. Now, the very first thing that we need to do is run npm install next-auth. So this is going to install a package called Next-Auth that makes it easy for us to add authentication to our apps. And then after running Next-Auth, we also need to create a GitHub app. So to add OAuth authentication using GitHub, so they can basically do sign in with GitHub. This would be very similar if they wanted to do sign in with Google, sign in with Amazon, sign in with Facebook, X, whatever it might be. All of these are going to be similar. I'm going to show you GitHub and how to add OAuth using Next-Auth and GitHub, but it would be very similar across all those different providers. So the first thing that we have to do here is I'm going to go to my GitHub, and I'm on localhost 3000 here, but we haven't run the app yet. So let's go ahead and actually do that before I get to creating the app in GitHub. So I'm going to run npm run dev, and then upon running this and refreshing localhost 3000, I just have a blanket Next.js app. But I'm going to go to my GitHub here, so just code Ryan Solomon, and then I'm going to add a new project, and I'm going to call this Next-Auth, and then I'm going to create repository here, and then I need to add this to my project. So I'm going to copy git remote add origin. But before I run that command, I'm going to run git add, git commit, and I'm going to just do init commit. And now I'm going to run git remote add origin. I'm going to run git push, but I actually need to run git push set upstream origin main. So I'm going to run that. So now this should be pushed up to my project. So I'm going to refresh this page, and I do see I just have my initial Next.js project here. So I just connected this to my GitHub, but what I need to do here is I need to go ahead and add a GitHub project. So to do that, I'm going to go to, I believe, settings. And then now that I'm in settings, I'm going to come down to developer settings, and I'm going to add a new GitHub app, and I need to put in my password for this. And throughout this, I might need to blur out some like API keys and stuff like that. So I'll kind of explain that as I go though. So now I have my GitHub app. So for this, I'm going to just name it Next-Auth, and then I'm going to just do like Ryan or something like that. For my homepage URL, I'm actually just going to use localhost 3000. So I'm going to copy that. That's going to be my URL for my callback URL. So this is the URL, like after GitHub has authenticated the user, where should I redirect them to? And I'm going to just do localhost 3000. I might need to change this in the future, but we'll see if this works here in a sec. And then I'm not going to worry about a webhook URL. We are going to expire user auth tokens. I'm also going to click on these two here. And then I think I'm good to kind of create this GitHub app. So now I'm going to click create GitHub app and registration successful. So this is going to give me a client ID right here, which for the purposes of this video, I might be blurring out right now just so I don't share like sensitive information. It's always a good idea to not show different auth secrets and stuff like that. And I'm also going to click on generate a new client secret here. So now I have this new client secret here, which I'm probably blacking out on the screen right now, just so I keep things a little bit secure on my end. But now that I have this in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my terminal. We have our new GitHub app. We also have like our client ID and our secret there, but we also need to generate a Next-Auth secret. And one kind of easy way we can do that is by, in our terminal, we can run open SSL RAND hyphen base 6432. And that's going to generate a secret right here. Now, I'm probably blurring this out again, but you should now see a secret popped out in your terminal after running this. And what we need to do is we need to go to our Next.js config, and I'm going to use this secret here. So let's go to Next.js config. I'm going to open up this pair of curly braces here, and within these curly braces, I'm going to add env colon, and then I'm going to add a few properties to my env. So one property I'm going to add is going to be called GitHub app client ID. And for this GitHub app client ID, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go add the client ID of my GitHub app that I just made. And for now, I'm just going to put an empty string. We're going to go grab that in a second, but we're also going to add a GitHub app client secret. And that's going to be empty pair of quotes for now. And then I'm going to do Next-Auth secret. So in the terminal here, this is our Next-Auth secret. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this from our terminal, and I'm going to paste it in here. Now you could also use a .env file to access these and add them to your config here. I would definitely not recommend pushing these auth secrets up to GitHub. Make sure you don't do that. Make sure to use an env file and add that to your git ignore. We're just kind of putting it here for more demonstration purposes. But now that I have that Next-Auth secret, I'm going to clear my terminal and I'm going to close that. But now we need to go get the GitHub app client ID and the GitHub app client secret. So if I go to my GitHub app, I should now grab my client ID, which is right here. So I can grab my client ID. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come back. I'm going to paste that in here, and I'm probably blurring all of these out. And then I'm going to also get my GitHub app client secret, which is our client secret that we generated right here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and then paste that within my env file as well. So that should set up our GitHub app client ID, client secret, and our Next-Auth secret. So now that we have this in place, I'm going to close this. And the next step that we need to do is we need to go ahead and add a kind of configuration for Next-Auth. So the way that we can do this is I'm going to create a folder, and it's just going to be a lib folder, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call this Next-Auth.js. And within this folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import Next-Auth options from Next-Auth, and then I'm going to import GitHub provider from Next-Auth /providers/GitHub. And I'm using the theme winter is coming in case you're wondering about that. And then we're going to export a const auth options. And then we're going to set that to an object in which we're going to set our secret. And this is going to be our process.env.Next-Auth secret. So this is what we just added, like our Next.js config env property, our Next-Auth secret. We're going to set that as our secret. And then we are going to set a providers property that is going to be an array. And this is where we could add a bunch of different providers, but we are just going to use our GitHub provider. We're going to call this function and we're going to pass an object into it. And as one property of this, it's going to be our client ID. And this is going to be our process.env. I believe it was GitHub app client ID. And then we also need to do our client secret, which is going to be our process.env.GitHub app client secret. And then we're exporting this here. And I actually didn't need to import Next-Auth options. It's just kind of out of habit. If I'm using TypeScript, I will import that. I just decided to use JavaScript here kind of at the last second, just because my philosophy there is that if I do tutorials in JavaScript, then it makes it more accessible to people that don't know TypeScript. And if you know TypeScript, like you could do this in TypeScript, I think that that's pretty doable. So with that, we have set up our auth options for Next-Auth, and we've set up our GitHub provider. But now what we need to do is we need to set up a route handler that is going to allow us to kind of perform our sign in and sign out. So the way that we can do this is we can do a new folder within our app folder, and I'm going to call this auth. And then within auth, we're going to do another folder that is going to be square brackets, and it's going to be catch all route ... Next-Auth. So if I go to any route that is /auth /Next-Auth, this is going to get handled within this route.js file. And if this isn't clear here, I have Next.js tutorials on how route handling works. So if any of this doesn't make sense, I would definitely go check those out. But within my route.js file, within this catch all folder, import auth options from my lib of Next-Auth here. And then I'm going to say const handler is equal to, and I need to import Next-Auth from Next-Auth. So I'm going to also import Next-Auth from next-auth. And then const handler is going to equal calling Next-Auth and then passing in my auth options. And then we need to export handler as get, handler as post. So here we are calling Next-Auth with our auth options that we just created within our lib folder here. And that's effectively going to allow us to where if we try to access /auth /any route, so auth /sign in, auth /sign out, this Next-Auth library is going to handle those requests and basically allow us to perform a sign in and sign out. And since we added a bunch of like configuration and stuff like that, I'm going to, you see that it shut down our server here, which it may have done for you as well. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to just make sure my port 3000 is not running. So I'm going to make sure that that process is done. So nothing's running on that port. So I'm going to run npm run dev again. So our app is now up and running. So on localhost 3000, I should see my app. But now if I try to access auth /sign in, I should see a sign in with GitHub button. So you see Next-Auth automatically added this button when accessing this route because we added this catch all route of auth /Next-Auth here. And since we called Next-Auth with our auth options and we exported our handlers as get and post, Next-Auth is already handling this for us. Now we are getting a warning here for Next-Auth URL. If you're in production, you might want to set this. We don't necessarily need to worry about this right now though. So now that I have this in place, I should be able to click on sign in with GitHub and I get this page could not be found. And what I'm seeing in this URL here is it's trying to access API /auth /sign in. So I think what I actually want to do here is, I think instead of just doing app auth Next-Auth, I want to do app and then I'll do API as a folder /auth. So I added a folder auth within API this time. And then within auth, this is where I'm going to actually add my catch-all route for ... And let me delete that. Next-Auth. And then within that, I'm going to add my route.js file. And within this file, we're going to take our auth route.js and paste that in. So instead of just doing auth /... .next-auth route.js, we want API /auth / catch-all next-auth route.js. All right, so I'm going to delete this folder and then we should be all set here. So just to be clear here, instead of just doing auth / next-auth and putting a route.js, we're now moving that to API /auth / next-auth with a route.js within there. So if I come back to my app here, what we're going to want to access is /API /auth / sign in. And when I come here, I should be able to click on sign in with GitHub. And then it says Next-Auth Ryan by Code Ryan Solomon would like permission to, and I'm going to authorize Next-Auth here. And then it now redirects me to localhost 3000. So it looks like it's working here, but how can we actually tell if I have an active session going on here? Well, the way that we can do this is a few different ways. So we can actually do this within a route handler. So let's go ahead and add within API. I'm going to just add a new route.js file within API. So this will be anything / API. So I'm going to just do route.js and I'm going to do export async function get, and it's going to take a request. And then I'm going to say const session is equal to await get server session from Next-Auth. And then to that, we need to pass our auth options that's in our lib Next-Auth. And then here, I'm just going to console.log our session. And then I'm going to return a next response from next / server. And let's just return .json. And let's just do an ID of 1 or something like that. So within a route handler here, we're just console logging our session. And this should give you an idea of how you could use your session that we should now have that we're signed in. So if I just try to go to / API here and I press enter, I see it just returns an ID of 1 here because I don't actually have a page here. And going to / that API, that's just going to make a GET request to this route. So within my route handler, I should have console logged my session. And you can see I did. So my name is Code Ryan Solomon. My email, it's undefined because I don't think I have my email hooked up to my GitHub. But if you do, you should see your email. So this is telling me that we are signed in to our GitHub and we have an active session going on here. And the user is Code Ryan Solomon. So you can see this is an active session here. So you now have an active session using OAuth with GitHub and Next-Auth. Now, we can also access this in server components here. So if I go to my page.js file, this is technically a server component because I'm not using use client. Well, we can access our session the very same way that we accessed it within a route handler. We can say const session is equal to await get server session, and then we can pass in our auth options here. And I'm going to export default async function. And then for this session, I'm going to console.log a property called homepage. So we know we're within our homepage, and then I'm going to console log my session. So if I come back, and if I just go back to localhost 3000 and go to my homepage, it renders that out. But within my console, I should see homepage, and I can access my session using get server session within Next-Auth. Now, what if you want to access your session within a client component? Well, let's create a new folder called client. And then within this folder, I'm going to add a page.jsx file. And then at the top of this page, I'm going to close my terminal. I'm going to just say use client. And then I'm going to export default function client page. So this is going to be a client component right now. I'm going to just return for the sake of this, just a div h1 that says client page. And to access our session here, what I need to do is I need to actually wrap our root layout within a session provider or within a React context for our session. So I'm going to access layout.js here. And within this, I'm going to import session provider from Next-Auth /React. So I'm going to import this session provider. And then what I need to do is wrapping around my children here, I need to wrap that within my session provider because it's going to provide my session to my client components here. So I'm going to take my session provider and I'm going to wrap that around my children here, like so. And now that I have this in place, what I can do is I can now use this session within my client component. So I'm going to go back to my client page here. And the way that I can use this is I can call the use session hook from Next-Auth. So I can import use session. So this is a custom hook from Next-Auth, from Next-Auth /React here. And then within this client page, I can say const data, status is equal to use session. And then I can just console.log my data and my status. And I'm going to save that. And one thing that we also need to do here is within this root layout here. So this session provider, it needs to be within a client component. So I'm actually glad that I ran into this because we don't want to make this entire root layout a client component. So let's actually add another file here within our app, and let's just call this, how about Next-Auth provider.js. And within this file, what we're going to do is we're going to call this use client, and then I'm going to import, we're going to do the same thing that we did in our layout here. So I'm going to import session provider. I'm going to just copy this, paste it here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to export default function. We're going to call Next-Auth provider. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in children to this component. And then what we're going to return is we're going to return our session provider and pass in our children to that. And now instead of rendering out our entire layout.js as a client component, we're going to use Next-Auth provider from the file that we just created and render that here. So this prevents us from needing to make this entire client component for a root layout. We can just wrap our children with this here because this Next-Auth provider, to use session provider here, it needs to be a client component. So now that I have this in place, we're still using it within our page.js here, and I can console log my data and status. So if we come back here, and if I go to /client, I should see my client's page. And then since this is a client component, I should also see console logged an object that has data and status. So my data is going to be my user with my name here. And then it also gives me like when this session expires. And then it gives me a status of authenticated, which is what we want to see now that I'm authenticated. So now you can see how to use your session within client components, within route handlers, and within your server components. But how can we actually sign out of our session here? Well, very easy here. Just like what we did before, I can do API auth sign out. And when I come here, are you sure you want to sign out? Next-Auth automatically gives us this. I'm going to click sign out. It theoretically does this, but now let's check our different sessions. So if I go to /API here, I see ID of 1. And if I come back, I should see in my console here, my session is null. And then if I just come back to localhost 3000 to my homepage and I render this, I should see homepage session is null. And then if I go to /client, I should be able to look at my console. And what I'm going to see is that my object and now his data is null, status is unauthenticated. So that is how you can add authentication using NextAuth within your Next app router. Let me just give a quick rundown of what we did. So within our application, we installed NextAuth. And then what we needed to do is within our next.config.js here, we needed to add in our .env, our different client app secret, our NextAuth secret, and our GitHub provider credentials. And we also created our GitHub app within GitHub. And once we did that, we could then come to this lib folder within NextAuth, and we could add our auth options with our secret and our different providers. If we wanted to have like Google sign in with Google or sign in with Amazon, we would go and we would create an app within Google or Amazon. We would get the client ID, the client secrets, and we would add these to our providers here. And then once we have this in place, then we can go create our API /auth /NextAuth here, and then create a route.js file within NextAuth. And then we call NextAuth, we pass in our auth options that we created, and we export a handler as get and a handler as post. And then when accessing /API /auth /sign in, it gives us a sign in with GitHub button automatically. And if we go to sign out, it gives us a sign out button. And then within our route handlers, we can use get server session and pass in our auth options to see our session within our route handlers. We can do a very similar thing within our server components. We can do get server session, pass in auth options, and we can see our session. And then within a client component, what you can do is you can wrap your application so you can create a NextAuth provider, and that needs to be a client component, and you need to render out your session provider with your children rendered out between them. And then within our layout.js, we can wrap all of our children, so all of our pages and all of our data, with this NextAuth provider. And then within our client components, we can use session from NextAuth /React. And then once we have that, we can call use session. That's going to return an object that has a data and status property that gives us information about our session within client components. So hopefully all this was clear and gives you a really good idea of how to add authentication within your Next apps using NextAuth within the Next.js 13 app router. So thanks for tuning into this. I know we hit some kind of hiccups there, but that's just part of development. So I figured I would keep all that in here so you could see kind of all that in action. So thanks for tuning into this. I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you in the next one.